welcome to be my guest and be my guest with Mary Honan. And we're supporting here on the show, we're supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And my very special guest here today is the wonderful, spectacular, really, Joan Freeman, who has packed so much into her life. It's just extraordinary. Hello, Joan.
Hi, Mary. Oh my God, such an introduction. I'm mortified.
Yeah, but it's, I said it to Teresa, you'll be next. And she said, oh, she's a hard act to follow, Mary.
No,
Your
not at
sister,
all.
Teresa. But you're a sister of Teresa Lowe, where in the world famous for many other things. But tell me about your life, Joan. Where did you grow up?
So I'm one of 8 children. And when I was the youngest, I'm the sixth in the family. And when I was born in Dublin, and when I was a year old, my dad had to look for work, and there was no work. This is late 50s, 1959 at this point. And so he had to go to England, and we, of course, all had to go with him. So we traveled to England. My 2 younger sisters, Teresa and Mary, were born in England. And we stayed there 11 years. And for 11 years, my parents pined for Ireland.
It happened. It happened to my mum. We lived in England and she couldn't wait to get home. And Dad couldn't get a job here. So he had to stay.
It's a story that many, many families in the 50s and 60s, early 60s would be able to relate to.
Yeah.
And I remember every St. Patrick's Day we'd be getting mass. And of course, we were in England, so there wasn't mass as often as over here. And we'd have to get a 7 o'clock mass in the morning. And my parents would be crying as they were singing the hymn Glorious St. Patrick. And I was crying, looking at them crying,
I know.
Yeah, so we came back when I was 12. I started firstly in Louis in Rathmines. But they were so happy. They were so happy that we came home, and life was 100 times better in Ireland for us. Not only for us from an educational point of view, because the Irish education is superb.
Yeah, it is.
Oh my God! When you compare it to other countries, it was, and then even then, 50 years ago, it was absolutely far superior.
You have nuns. Did you have
in England, no. Sorry, there were nuns in the convent, but then I went to a school called Dormer High School. So no, there weren't nuns.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no such thing as homework during that time.
Really?
The school provided you with the books, and you did the books during the day, and that was it, But coming back to Ireland, I got an awful shock. First of all, I was exposed to learn 3 or 4 languages, which was incredible. And anyway, and it was just a very different setup. The whole setup was very different, but it was also far better for my parents. My mother, when we came over here, she would have been about 50 at that point, and she learned to drive for the first time.
Wow.
And my parents never had a car. My dad didn't drive, and my parents had no car.
No, mine didn't either.
This is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, Daddy drove in the Royal Army Medical Corps, but Mum wouldn't let him get a car in case something would happen. She treated him like a 4-year-old.
I think I'm still like that with my husband. I think women did in those years. But anyway, so life was a lot better from an economical point of view, but also from a morale point of view. They were just very contented. So that was basically, I went to Louis Rathmines. I left school, there was no conversation, by the way, at that stage about me going on to college. There were 8 children, as I said, and by the time I left school, I was the oldest of the young, there was only 3 of us left. Everybody had gone and got married. My dad was working in a shop, in his brother's shop, and we needed money. We needed an income. So there was no discussion, and I didn't want to. I mean, as far as I was concerned, I couldn't wait to leave school, go out and earn a few bob. But of course, in those days, every single penny was handed up as well.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
unopened.
yeah. Yeah.
Wage check, your mother would open the wage check and
Yeah,
give
and
you
you know
back
what you
most of it.
think of it.
In my
And
case,
I was earning £30 a week at the time, which, you know, wasn't
a lot
bad,
of
but
money.
my dad was earning £60 a week. And anyway, so that was grand. I went, as I said, I started doing secretary. Because I was educated in England, I wasn't allowed to learn Irish when I came home to Ireland. So while the class was learning Irish, I was sent off to learn shorthand and typing. So by the time I left school, I was pretty good at that.
Yeah,
So I went straight into a secretarial job, and I was bored out of my tree.
yeah.
But it
I
was
can
an
imagine. I
income.
was too. Yeah,
It was, yeah, it was an income. Um, and I suppose during those years, I got my first taste of charitable work.
yeah.
And I joined the Irish Epilepsy Association for no reason at all, except that they were looking for volunteers. And I volunteered, and I started their very first 24-hour fast in Grafton Street,
Okay.
which brought in money. And so I loved all that. And then just I changed job probably 2 or 3 times. My last job, I met my husband. I met him when I was 22 and married him a couple of weeks after I was 24.
Oh, I thought you said.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say a couple of weeks after. I was going to say, my God.
He asked me. But anyway, so and I remember us having this conversation. I mean, I did a pre-marriage course, all that sort of thing. And I remember having a conversation with them saying, look, I want a career. And I had no career, by the way, let me tell you. I didn't know what the hell it was. It's still secretariat type of stuff. I said, I want a career. So I don't want to have children for the first 5 years. So as it turned out, I had 4 children in the first 5 years. So it was reversed the whole thing.
Nothing went as planned.
No. And it was during that time when I was at home, I decided to go to college and to study. And in during that time, I had joined an organisation called Accord. At the time, they used to be called CMAC. It was a counselling service for couples. And I was trained as a therapist, as a couple counsellor, and I really liked it. So I decided I was going to go and really study for this. So I studied psychology. And for someone who didn't even think of college, I got my honours degree in it, and then I got a master's. And there at Christmas, I was given an honorary doctorate in Trinity. Yeah, so
Trinity.
someone who was crap at school, who couldn't care less.
It's amazing the way we, as mature students, just a light bulb moment happens in our lives, and we just. I was the same. All I wanted was dancing, and I ended up going back and doing a degree, master's, and PhD. And I was saying to myself, like, where did that come from? Because I
Yeah,
was never academic going to school. It was good, but I was always daydreaming. You know,
yeah. And you know what? But what that means, I think, though, is that it just proves that children of 16, 17, and 18 haven't a clue what they want to do. And
no.
here we expect them
How do you
to
expect them to come out of school?
for career decisions
Yeah,
for life, which, I was actually, at one point there a few years ago, I was a temporary student psychologist in one of the IT colleges. And I remember the first years, nearly 50% of them left in the first year.
yeah.
Um, First of all, because they chose the wrong subjects,
Yeah,
and
and they took
didn't know how
subjects
to
their
handle it.
parents wanted for them in many
Yeah,
cases.
exactly. So we were probably the lucky ones, Mary, you and I, the fact that it came at a later time in life. So
Oh,
um,
you have no idea. Yeah, it was just, I don't know where it came from. I think it was just a case of keep busy at the
yeah,
time, and then it
yeah,
became an addiction.
it really does, doesn't it?
It does. I think when it comes late in life, anything you take on or anything you do late in life becomes an addiction.
You're embracing it, and you wholeheartedly want to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference.
Yeah. But so you went. That was your first taste, really, of And at what point did you set up Pieta House?
So first of all, I sort of dabbled a little bit in counselling outside of Accord, and now that I had my qualifications, and I actually only discovered this last week, by the way. I love problem solving. So I did a little bit of counselling, in nearby, just as a few hours a week. And then one of the times that I was counselling there, I came across someone who was suicidal. And when I think back on how I reacted to that person, so we're talking about 17, 18 years ago.
Yeah.
And Ireland was a different place.
Yeah.
Very different place. And if anybody was suicidal or depressed, nobody would talk about it for a start. But if you were suicidal, people would think you need to go to a hospital, you need to be admitted, you're a danger to yourself, but you're also a danger to other people. And that was my mentality.
Yeah, really.
And I remember thinking, I want to get this person out of here as quickly as possible, and refer them to a GP, back to their GP. And when I think back on that time, I have such regret and sorrow and shame over it, because now, knowing what I do know, is that people just need to be listened to. They need to be embraced and supported. And I suppose the other thing I discovered over the years was that most people who take their lives are reacting to a life event. This is not a long-term suffering from mental health issues. They're reacting to a life event. And as it happens,
a short-term solution to, or a long-term solution to a short-term problem. In many
and that can be true, but also it can be a long-term problem, and suffering for a long time. I mean, for example, but also it can be a short-term problem too. So, for example, during the economic crash, during 2007, 8, 9, whatever year it was, one of the things, this is when Pieta was open at this stage. Pieta was open in 2006, a year before the crash. And what we saw were, in particular, men coming into us who were suicidal, who had attempted suicide. And what happened was the crash affected men, particularly farmers and those in construction. And so they'd lose a job. This would have an impact on their relationship and their family life. The relationship, the marriage relationship, whatever relationship would break down. The husband would leave, or the partner would leave, And so not only did they lose their job, they also lost their family.
Yeah.
Their partner, the love of their life. But I suppose more in particular, that spontaneous access to their children, if they had access.
Yeah.
And then they lost all reason for living.
Yeah.
And it was astonishing to see that this is really, for many people, this is what suicide is about, a reaction to a very serious life event.
Yeah. And as well as that, in many cases, these were men who would not find it easy, probably farmers who were living on their own, even in many cases, who wouldn't find it easy to talk about their problems to somebody, who wouldn't have ever had reason to actually sit down and talk and say, like women do with each other, I'm upset today over this or that. Men they're not as forthcoming about their emotional problems as women are. And if you're working as a builder or you're working as a farmer, you tend to be so occupied with what you're doing that you don't give yourself that time to. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And when you said about that, it brought back a memory for me. I remember being contacted by a vet, and who said that she was visiting a farmer, and that she had to step over the carcasses of his animals to get to the door, to get to where he was. And this guy was really, really depressed.
Yeah.
He was so depressed that he hadn't got the energy or the will or the inclination, just couldn't mind the cattle. And it was just such a terrible thing to hear, to think that somebody was suffering to that extent on their own.
Yeah. But they
So,
didn't know, they didn't have the equipment, or they weren't equipped to actually ask for help, because in many cases they've been their whole lives on a farm on their own, or while their wives would be like looking after the house, they might be out, and there wouldn't be that dynamic where you'd sit down and tell your problems too, I suppose.
I also remember a lot of these farmers could have been living still with their elderly parents.
Yeah.
Who had to automatically take over the farm. And not only were they looking after the farm, they were also looking after their elderly parents, where there may be dementia or whatever else was going on. Such a harsh life.
And such an isolating life, really. You know, I suppose in some respects, women have it that bit easier. We can talk to each other. We are talkers. As you know, if you have a problem, you say it to your best friend. Men don't seem to have that dynamic with other men, do you know? And they tend to bottle it up, and especially in macho jobs or farming jobs or building jobs, it magnifies, I think.
Yeah,
But you know, it's an extraordinarily successful adventure, or that you went on with the charity.
It was phenomenal, but I mean, the only reason why it was a success, Mary, is because the people of Ireland embraced it.
Yeah.
I mean, remember, what makes a charity or an organization like that is that, first of all, you know, you have obviously you've got to have good staff who are passionate about what they're doing, but also volunteers. I mean, if you think about Darkness into Light, every single penny that is raised for Darkness into Light, and every single event, every single walk is organized by volunteers. The organization couldn't do that without
no one person could do that on their own.
No. So
it
then exactly, but the crucial element to a successful charity are the people who use the charity, who use the service. What's the point of us if people didn't come? You know, so they're the people who have the courage. I mean, as I said, 17 years ago, whatever, 15, 16 years ago, to have the courage, though, in those days, to come admitting that you need help was extraordinary.
Absolutely life-changing, really, wasn't it? Because you know, as you said, in those days it was a taboo subject. People were I lived directly opposite the mental hospital in Limerick, and I grew up in front of it. And my grandmother had a little house, but she had also had a little shop there, and all belonging to her, and generations back lived there in small houses, and they used to feed the patients, because the patients would come over to the wall. In many cases, a lot of these patients were in there for silly little things like depression, or for postnatal depression, or for land,
or pregnant,
and for land, or Down syndrome, because there was no.
The husband wanted to get rid of them, whatever.
You know, just to get the land, just to put somebody away for the rest of their lives, so that you could get land. And these people, they were joyous. I mean, I used to go in there all the time, Irish, or dancing for them. We used to put on a show at Christmas, and we'd go in, myself and my friends, and sit inside in the shed that they had, and they'd be over there smoking, and our neighbours used to break up cigarettes in half and give them a half in the morning and a half in the afternoon, and put over food over to them. And this was years and years ago now, when Do you know, we used to call the nurses, they were called keepers. They weren't called, and the houses that they had were called the keepers' houses. They weren't called the nurses' houses. They're now the nurses' houses. But at that, in the 40s and 50s and 30s, they were known as keepers' houses because they used to keep the people. And it was just, it was such a dismal place. But
I was going to say, I would be very, very distressed learning about the stories that went on in that place, as in the stories of why people were put there in the first place.
I had friends who were nurses in there, and their fathers were nurses in there. And, they did their best, I suppose. But in the 40s and 30s and 40s, it was, it wasn't, from the stories, it wasn't nice. But the patients were lovely, and we used to sit and talk to them. And one man told me one day that he had passed his mathematics. He got a first-class honours degree, mathematics. The next day he was in St. Joseph's.
Oh my God.
And he just snapped, and that was their life. And I'm still living directly opposite it, and I'm emotionally attached to the place because of the people that I used to sit and talk to. Yeah. We were only about 9, 10, 8 maybe years of age, and we used to play over there with them. We never feared the patients. Ever, But then you decided in your wisdom, or it was decided for you, that you were going to go for the presidency of Ireland.
Well, before that, remember,
insanity took possession of you, Joan.
Before that, I had a taste of it by being nominated as a senator.
Yeah.
So that gave me a little bit of a taste of it, to be honest. And it had been suggested by several people anyway, that I should go for it. And the only reason I went for it was because I wanted to embrace the people of Ireland in that mental health hug.
Yeah.
But I wanted us we went so far with Pieta, that people now were talking about suicide, but there still is a stigma attached to mental health. I mean, God knows what's happening to our country right now, the mental health of our country after the COVID.
Yeah.
So I really thought that and probably this was a mistake, that the lens shouldn't be turned outwards from our country to other countries, like presidents do, and they engage with other countries, that we should turn the lens back inwards and look at our own. And that to me was terribly important. But in hindsight, the president really is an ambassador for the country to engage with other countries.
Yes.
I thought we could have used this office and this opportunity to mind ourselves.
And we had such extraordinary success with 2 previous female presidents. It was bound to be a success with somebody who was taking on, I suppose, the mantle of mental health, which is just so, it's just so important in this. It's so important to any society, is good mental health services.
I mean, it filters through every single aspect of life. When you wake up in the morning, you're without maybe even being aware of it, you're sort of doing a mental sort of check, a mental audit. How are you feeling today? And if there's things going on in your life, it can have an impact. It certainly impact your emotional health, but it can impact everything that you're going to do that day. So it's so important that from an early stage, and I'm talking about 3, 4 years of age, that children are taught how to cope, because lots of bad things happen. But how do you cope with it? And I think that's something I really wanted to push.
Yeah, I think that's so true, because I'm involved in Irish dancing all my life, and we were only talking about that. Children nowadays haven't grasped the concept of losing a competition. It's all, every child gets a medal, whether they, certainly at beginner's level and the next grade up, all the children get a medal. When I was competing, you were lucky if 3 people in the whole competition got a medal. and won a cup, and you just worked harder, and you accepted losing, and you accepted the word lose. It's not a four-letter word. It is, but
It's
but
not the bad word that
not a
people
bad
think.
four-letter word in the
Yeah.
sense that you can learn as much from your losses as from your victories, probably more.
It's exactly, it's really the only way. You learn from failure. I remember years ago hearing about a bank in America that would only give out loans to people who started a company and it collapsed because they were going to know all the pitfalls when they started again. I
Yeah,
thought it was a very clever thing.
yeah. I mean, we just. I think society today now is so protective of the young, that they're almost trying to protect them from disappointment,
Yeah,
from loss, from grief, from
yeah,
all the things that they're not going to ever be able to escape. Because even if it's only losing your husband, losing your partner, losing your friend, losing a family member, you're going to lose something in life that's really important. You're losing a job. And if you haven't got the ability to cope with that because you haven't been taught how to fail.
yeah, and
And I
yeah,
think
and taught resilience. You know.
so. When you set up Pieta House, did you ever imagine it was going to be as big as it was?
Not at all. I mean, I set it up in Lucan, and I set it up in Lucan for one very selfish reason, because I live in Lucan. I thought I could walk to work, but I actually thought it's going to look after Maynooth and Leixlip and Lucan itself and maybe Parmesan. And but it just grew and grew. And again, as I said, it's because people embraced it. And then it expanded outside of Dublin. Limerick was the very first centre. So Nora Conway, who's still the manager in Limerick, she came up to me one day in Dublin, travelled up by train, and she said, "I want your service. Can you please bring your service to Limerick? We really could do with it there." And I said, "Fine, go ahead. Find the premises, find the funding, and I'll bring it to Limerick." And that's exactly what she did. And JP McManus, as you probably know, bought the house for Pieta. Nora was extraordinary. She raised the funds to get moving in Limerick. And she was the very first person who had the courage outside of Dublin to go.
Massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Massive.
Yeah.
And okay, the fact COVID-19 has kind of put a damper on things in the sense of what would the darkness into light, how would it affect, how it'll affect it this year? Do you know?
Yeah, well, in fairness, it's probably done better this year than it did last year.
Yeah.
Because the appeal went out, as you probably know, on the Late Late Show, and the response was
I was surprised. I thought, oh God, that it's just going to really affect it now, in some way.
It actually, do you know what? It made me realize again, even though I've stepped down from Pieta House a few years, it reinforced the fact that this charity is owned by the people of Ireland. It's owned. There's no they were going to let
people of Ireland. It's the people of Ireland saying,
yeah,
the problem, and we need to address it. I mean, we were looking at there the other day now, Elvis Presley's grandson.
Yes. Was that a suicide?
Yes.
Oh God, I'm sorry to hear that.
He shot himself in the chest.
Oh dear.
And apparently his girlfriend was with him, and they heard her shouting, "Don't do it! Don't do it!" And he was looking back on the few times he was in the public. He always seemed so detached. He always seemed so. There was only two of them. It's easy to say on hindsight that you notice these things.
Yeah, I never even heard of him before. I never knew.
Yeah, he was very private, and they kept very much out of the limelight. Actually, the first time I really saw him was at Elvis's anniversary. They were putting a statue to him, and he and the sister and Priscilla and her and his mother were at it, and that was the first and last time you saw him in the public eye, really. But yeah, so it's just, and Limerick has such a high case of suicide. It's just,
It is. I don't know if it still has.
it doesn't seem to be now since COVID-19. Strangely enough, you don't seem to hear about. Thank God. But for a long time there, it was just, you had people um, walking the bridges in Limerick every
Trying
night.
to, yeah, an incredible service, that to have people, volunteers, go up and down like that. How much they must love their own county and their own people in that county.
Absolutely, they did some immense work
Yeah.
walking the bridges at night and cycling the bridges at night, and still it didn't stop. In some cases, it's still, I don't know what can be done to get people to realize. I mean, this show is connected with the Samaritans Limerick and Tipperary. We're supporting the Samaritans in Limerick, but I mean, anyone out there that's doing like you've been doing for many many years, giving of your time to try and save someone else's life, deserves huge praise.
Well, it's not me, Mary.
No, but
It's
all the people that are working with Pieta House,
yeah.
work.
Yeah, you know what? There's people who don't even work for Pieta House who quietly are saving other people's lives. I remember we were talking about farmers earlier. I remember talking to a farmer woman from Kerry whose neighbour, a man who's probably about 20 years younger than her, again in that situation of looking after elderly parents. He's 40 years of age, terribly lonely, terribly depressed. She'd ring him every single day and talk to him. So she saved and is saving his life. And these are the people, the heroes, who go without any recognition. And that's happening right across the country. So Pieta's great and the therapists are fabulous, but we have thousands of people who do this without recognition.
Mm. And have you given up completely the psychotherapy?
Psychotherapy. Well, I haven't done that in years anyway. So
it's all so you can take up.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so anymore. So I finished with the Shannon, finished on the 1st of April. And so I'm going to go.
Joan?
I did. I loved it. I used to pinch myself every single day when I was going, thinking, I'm a senator. How come? But I would hate the job forever. I would hate it. You have to be of a different disposition. And my problem is I want to see things happen very quickly, to the point that I go and do it if I don't see it happening. And when you're a senator, you have to wait. I mean, it took me 4 years to get 2 bills across the Shannon. And because the government came to an end then, those 2 bills have vanished into the thin air. Yeah. Unless they were taken across the door, they couldn't be put into law. So they're gone. Those 4 years trying to get those 2 really important bills across have just now, they're obsolete.
But when you were, Teresa says, you sound so like her as well, you know.
She copies me. I'm older than her. She's copied my voice all her life.
Genetic. Honestly, it's like if you look, I looked up to the ceiling. I forgot for a second it was you. You sound so like her. But what was I going to say? How difficult was it a step to actually say to yourself, okay, I will go for the presidency, because you know, there's so many people out there would say to themselves, oh God, if only I could have had the courage, if only I could have had the wherewithal, the mental wherewithal to actually do something as big as that. And to you know, because it's not easy. It's not easy for anybody, but you're putting yourself out there. You're allowing a space for others to abuse you, to say what they like to you. How can you go to? I know I don't. I think I'd be too fragile to you know, going to bed at night and wondering what the next day was going to, what was going to be said about you today, or you know, I'd be too fragile.
Well, I mean, the thing, I was fragile. We're all fragile, Mary. But I think it's how, again, we're coming back to resilience and how to cope. And first of all, my family were 100%. I wouldn't have done it unless they agreed, because once I was exposed, they were going to be exposed. That was the first thing. Secondly, I was kept away from all the negative stuff. Nobody told me what was going on Facebook or on Twitter, or I had no idea what was being said. They wouldn't let me know whether it was good or bad.
Or bad. And that's the right way.
Yeah, nothing. But the other thing was, I was terrified from the moment I'd wake up in the morning until I went to bed. I had this solid lump of fear in my chest right here every single day until the moment the election was over. And the night before.
And what was that fear? The fear that you would actually win?
No, God, no. I mean,
no, because that could be a fear as well. I'd be saying to myself, Jesus, what if I win? You know, I mean, it's one thing going for it, but if I win, I'm here in the Oris. I've got to make these. I was in the Oris not so long ago at the Tipperary, an award for the president of the Tipperary Peace, and you're looking at this place, and I'm thinking, what would I do inside this place for hours on end? And as
I have no fear of that. No, I have no fear of that. I thought if the people voted for me, they obviously thought I was capable of this. My fear was all the time of something, some insinuation, something that would destroy not me, but my family. And that was a fear all the time.
And you know, people can can say things about people nowadays, and it's almost you're guilty before being found innocent. You know, the same with Cliff Richards. It took that man to actually bring a court case. If he hadn't had the money, to bring that court case,
you see the interview with Dana there a few weeks ago about her journey from the time she won the Eurovision to running for the presidential election twice on 2 occasions.
I just can't understand how somebody like Dana went.
She's still traumatized by it.
I can imagine.
No, I'm not, because as I said, I was protected. I have a resilience. I mean, my mental health is good, thank God. But the night before the election, I was presented with this, which I haven't taken off since. And it's a medallion, and in very, very tiny writing on the back, the face of a lion. And on the back of it, it says, courage is not the absence of fear. It is the determination to do something anyway.
Yeah.
That is what my children thought I should get, is that they saw that I was terrified, but I still had the courage to go ahead and do it anyway. And if anything was to come out of all of this,
you've sent them a massive lesson.
My children, yeah.
Yeah, you've given them probably the greatest lesson that they could probably ever have is to fight through your greatest fears, and to have the resilience to believe in yourself.
Yeah.
And to believe not even as much in yourself, but in what you want to achieve as President of Ireland.
And it links back to what you said at the beginning, you know, it's okay to fail. It's absolutely fine. What did I learn from it? I had the best experience of my life. It was one of the best things I ever did. I'm one of the very, very few people in the history of the state to
who
be
has
able to put
gone,
my name on a ballot paper for the presidency.
and
So
even less women.
exactly. So you know, you have to look at what did you gain from it rather than what, you know, what nearly caused you to crack up. What did you gain? And there was so much that I gained.
Yeah, because failure isn't failure when you've gone out and you've tried to do something. You've only failed when you haven't bothered, or when you're like me and you think of all of these things that I would have loved to have done in my life. And I'm thinking back and saying, you know, I didn't do them because I was afraid. I didn't do this because I thought I was going to fail and I just didn't bother doing it. And
But look,
I
look
have
at what
no
you
regret.
do. You have a doctorate. You have a PhD. You're having your own radio program. You've done more than that.
Yeah. I know, but you always still think of the things that I wanted to do and didn't do because I hadn't the bloody courage to do them. And
Well,
you say when
yeah,
somebody has the courage like you to go out and put yourself through, it would have been hell for me. I think I would have just been terrified every minute of every day.
I
Uh,
was. I
uh,
was.
Going
But
out.
you know what, Mary? What it also made
Joan,
me realize.
when you
It
stood in
also,
front, when you stood in the podium, Joan, and
yeah.
during the debates, I looked at you and I thought, oh my God, how does she even do it? You know, and stand there and wait for people to ask you questions.
Yeah, it was horrifying to be honest. But you know, the thing is, I look at what is important in what we achieve, and you know, when I die and I have a headstone, I don't want, you know, this woman, uh, former presidential, you know, candidate, or I want it to say she was a wonderful wife and mother and friend.
and
That to me,
and
yeah,
sister.
yeah, and sister.
And
That to me,
you couldn't want to anything better in your life than that you were loved by the people who you loved.
yes, that's
Because
exactly.
there's nothing worse than loving somebody, I think, who doesn't love you. And when there's somebody there, your family, and you are the center of their universe,
Yeah,
and they are the center of yours, there's nothing more, there's nothing, no presidency,
it
nothing.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you become. To have that love and know that you have given your love is more important than anything else.
So what's next now for Joan Freeman?
I haven't a clue.
Are you one of these people who just falls into things that, you know, at the time that they're happening, and throw everything out to fate?
Well, I have a great faith
Yeah,
as opposed to fate. I have a
yeah.
great faith, and I would pray about whatever is right for me to do and what I need to do, that it will make itself, you know, open to me. I am very interested in mental health in the workplace. I think that the people, the younger generation, the 30-year-olds plus, are in the most hideous sort of situation. They have to work. There's so much competition. Um, they are not as fortunate as we were. I had a house at 24 years of
Yeah.
age. Now, granted, my husband had it. It didn't matter if I didn't work, you know, but now, you know, those who have houses, they're very fortunate. Those who have jobs without having to be so competitive. Um, I mean, if you take one of my daughters who was working, and her husband was working, this is before the COVID, she'd have to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning. She'd have to be gone at 7:30, you know, 8 o'clock. Make sure everything is ready, leg it to work. If she got a call from the creche that her child was sick, what do? You
Yeah.
know, what plan A is if you have a mother nearby, great. If you haven't got a mother nearby, the pressure of that alone,
Yeah.
and then going to the employer and saying, listen, my child is sick, I've got to go back and collect them. And the attitude sometimes of the employer, you know, that type of awful stress. So I would love to focus on mental health in the workplace. I think there's such a thing as presenteeism, where you are present in the job because you've got to be there for so many hours, but your mind is at with the problem somewhere else where you can't cope with it, you know?
Yeah, and I mean the thing about it is one thing that struck me about COVID-19 in particular. You know, with all the people that don't have homes, and people who have children and they're running from they have to get out. Before COVID-19, they had to leave the hostels that they were staying in or the hotels and walk around until 9 o'clock that evening and come back with their children. Where do they go now? When they're supposed to be, or during the height of COVID, when they were told not to be on the streets, not to be wearing masks, the last thing that's on somebody's mind like that is whether they're wearing a mask or not. They're worrying about where they're going to get their next dinner.
I don't think we have any idea of real suffering.
No, we don't. I mean, I'm lucky. I have my house that I wouldn't have it if my parents hadn't, left it to me. I'm fortunate. But I just think of all these misfortunes out in the street until 9 o'clock at night. Where can they cocoon, as this famous phrase, which irritates me no end. Irritates.
Yeah, me too.
I just think, like, where did that come from? But people have a lot more on their minds now than whether they wear a mask or whether they don't wear a mask going into a shop, or whether they have, stay in your homes. That phrase, stay at home. We're closer. We're closer together, being apart. And there's a misfortune walking the street with her child until 9 o'clock at night. And what is that doing to the mental health of somebody?
I actually remember during the election, and this is before COVID, this is during the election, I heard a young girl being interviewed. She was only about 15, and she was living in a hotel room with her mother and two younger children. And she said she dreaded every morning lifting the cover from her when she was in bed, lifting the cover up, because it would start all over again. She dreaded that first movement of lifting the cover of her bed to get out.
I mean, I understand it from the point of view of when we came home. We were living in a house and the house was condemned. And the house was condemned for 13 years, and that we were living in. Walls were coming away from the stairs coming away from the walls, floor was subsiding, and it was built on rock and it took my mother 13 years to get out of the house and I mean, when I think back on it now, how the woman didn't go insane, I don't know, with a 13-year-old child. And that's probably what's made me so conscious of people who are not as fortunate as everybody else. Yeah. And this phrase, where are we going to stay at home? Be with
what if you have a home? What if you don't have a home? Yeah.
What if you don't have a home? Mm-hmm. What if you're just being sent from Pieta to Caiaphas every morning until your children were coming out of school and then wandering around, and they couldn't study because they couldn't get back into a room until 9 o'clock?
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know what's going to happen. I know that Father Peter McVerry, he does an extraordinary job, and he's very vocal about the homeless crisis. But I just
hope the government, the new government, is going to tackle this.
I hope so. So on that point, Joan, we can only hope, I suppose, that things mental health will get better and will be treated better by our governments and taken more seriously.
Absolutely.
because it is the foundation of everything we do, is how we do it, you know, how our minds are healthy. Exactly. If our minds are healthy, our bodies will be healthy in many cases.
Yeah.
So Joan, thank you very much for coming on and talking to me today.
That was all. It was a pleasure.
I hope it wasn't traumatic.
No, it wasn't. It was great, Mary, and thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
And I wish you every success in the future. And you're a lovely person, and you would have made an extraordinary president of Ireland. You would have been our third greatest, well, not in that order, but you would have been one of the three greatest presidents we had, along with Mary McInnes and Mary Robinson.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.